My friends, there comes a moment in every earnest spiritual life when the soul itself grows weary, not weary of God, not weary of truth, but weary of seeking, weary of striving, weary of effort, weary of the constant sense that something must still be done, something must still be achieved, something must still be corrected before peace can come. And it is to that moment that this teaching speaks, for it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that the soul is ready to rest. Many of you have prayed faithfully. You have studied truth. You have practiced meditation. You have applied principles. You have worked with affirmations, treatments, denials, realizations. And yet, quietly, perhaps secretly, there has arisen within you a sense of exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, but spiritual fatigue. You begin to feel that even your prayers have become labor, that even your seeking has become a burden, and you ask, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with fear, why, after all this, do I still feel as though I am trying to make life work? The answer is simple, though not always welcome to the human mind, because you are still trying to make life work. And life was never meant to be made to work by human effort. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? The Master asked. And again he said, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink. Not because food and drink are unimportant, but because life itself is not sustained by thought. There is a deep illusion that pervades the spiritual path, and it is this: that realization comes through effort, that God is reached by discipline, that peace is attained by mastery of the mind. But God is not at the end of effort. God is at the end of effortlessness. Be still and know that I am God. Not do stillness, not practice stillness. Be still, and notice that the knowing comes after the stillness, not before it. Most seekers are tired not because they have failed, but because they have been sincere in the wrong direction. They have labored where only surrender was required. They have strained where only yielding would have sufficed. They have tried to bring God into their experience, not realizing that God has never been absent from it. The kingdom of God is within you, not at the end of your prayers, not at the conclusion of your demonstrations, not as a reward for your spiritual discipline, but within you, here, now. The human sense believes that spiritual life is a ladder, rung by rung, effort upon effort, achievement upon achievement. But the Christ reveals another way, the way of recognition. I and my Father are one, not will be one, not hope to be one, are one. The tragedy is not that we are separated from God, but that we believe we are, and then spend our lives trying to overcome a separation that never existed. And so the soul grows tired. It grows tired of affirming peace while feeling strain. It grows tired of declaring abundance while feeling fear. It grows tired of speaking truth while inwardly wrestling with conditions. This weariness is not something to be healed or corrected. It is something to be honored. It is the signal that the soul is ready to stop fighting shadows and begin resting in substance. God is not found through intensity. God is not revealed through mental effort. God is not experienced through constant spiritual activity. God is known in silence. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Yet how quickly we pass over such words as though they were poetry instead of law. Rest is not laziness. It is alignment. Quietness is not emptiness. It is receptivity. Confidence is not self-assurance. It is trust in the activity that is already governing the universe. You are not here because you need another method. You are here because you are ready to stop, ready to lay down the tools of spiritual warfare, ready to cease wrestling with thoughts, conditions, appearances, and outcomes, ready, perhaps for the first time, to let God be God in your experience, not theoretically, not scripturally, but actually. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. A child does not strive to live. A child does not manage breathing, digestion, circulation. Life lives the child. And so it is meant to be with us. There is an activity within you that has never been tired, never been confused, never been anxious. That activity is God. And the moment you stop trying to use it, you begin to feel it. The deepest error is not sin, disease, or lack. The deepest error is the belief that life is something you must handle. And when that belief is entertained long enough, even the most sincere seeker becomes exhausted. But hear this gently. You were never meant to carry life on your shoulders. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. Not assist you, sustain you. And so we begin not with instruction, not with technique, not with another practice, but with recognition. Recognition that nothing new must be attained. Recognition that nothing is missing. Recognition that the weariness you feel is the doorway, not the obstacle. The soul has reached the end of effort and is standing, perhaps unknowingly, at the threshold of grace. Grace does not come when we are strong. Grace comes when we stop. Grace does not come when we have perfected our understanding. Grace comes when we let go of the need to understand. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Weakness here does not mean failure, it means the surrender of personal effort. And so, before we go any further, before we speak of practice or pause or listening, let us simply acknowledge this. You are not here to learn how to do more. You are here to learn how to let be. The Christ does not ask for your labor. It asks for your availability. It does not ask for your effort. It asks for your consent. Rest now, not as an exercise, but as a truth. Let the soul settle into the awareness that nothing is required of it in this moment. The Father within is already at work. And in that recognition, something begins to loosen, quietly, gently, without force. Now, having come to the end of striving, having recognized, even faintly, the weariness that effort brings, we are prepared to understand what spiritual practice truly is. And here, my friends, we must be very careful. For the human mind immediately translates the word practice into something to be done, something to be repeated, something to be mastered. Yet the practice of the infinite way is not a discipline of effort, it is a discipline of yielding. We have been taught, often sincerely but mistakenly, that spiritual growth is achieved by doing more prayer, more meditation, more affirmations, more treatments, and so the mind sets itself to work upon God as though God were an object to be reached, persuaded, or activated. But the Christ teaching does not support this. Jesus did not say, "Strive and know that I am God." He said, "Be still." And stillness is not an activity. It is the cessation of activity. True practice begins when we cease trying to make something happen. It begins when we withdraw the human will from the process and allow the divine activity to reveal itself. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. This is not poetry. It is law. Wherever might and power are exerted, spirit recedes, not because spirit leaves, but because the human sense becomes too noisy to perceive it. The practice, then, is not a method for controlling thought. It is not an attempt to silence the mind. It is not a concentration upon words, images, or ideas. All such efforts belong to the realm of doing, and while they may produce temporary calm, they do not reveal God. God is revealed only when the mind stops reaching outward and begins to rest inwardly, without agenda, without expectation, without demand. Let us understand this clearly. The mind cannot reach God. The mind can think about God, talk about God, quote God, even preach God, but it cannot know God. God is known only through consciousness yielded, not consciousness exerted. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Stayed, not driven, not forced, not disciplined, but gently resting. There is a vast difference between human stillness and spiritual stillness. Human stillness is an attempt to suppress thought. Spiritual stillness is the absence of interest in thought. Human stillness says, I must stop thinking. Spiritual stillness says, I need not follow these thoughts. And the moment thought is no longer followed, it loses its authority and falls away of its own accord. This yielding is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not indifference. It is obedience to the deepest law of being. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. That is the ultimate practice. Not asking, not pleading, not explaining, simply yielding the sense of personal responsibility into the keeping of the infinite. Most seekers have never truly yielded. They have substituted spiritual effort for worldly effort. They have exchanged material striving for metaphysical striving. But striving remains striving, whether it is clothed in religious language or secular ambition, and the soul knows the difference. That is why even spiritual effort eventually exhausts us. Yielding, on the other hand, brings rest immediately, not because problems are solved, but because the burden of solving them has been laid down. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Notice that the promise is not first of healing, supply, or success, but rest. Rest is the sign that yielding has begun. Now, the human mind asks, how do I yield? And that very question reveals the difficulty, for yielding cannot be done. It can only be allowed. You do not yield by an act of will. You yield by the relaxation of will. You yield when you stop trying to manage your spiritual life and let the Spirit manage it for you. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. In this yielding, there is no sense of blankness or vacancy. On the contrary, there is an alert awareness, a gentle listening, a quiet expectancy, not expectancy of something coming, but expectancy of something revealing itself. Elijah did not find God in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the still small voice. And that voice was not shouting instructions. It was making itself known in silence. Therefore, the practice we are speaking of is not a technique to acquire something new. It is the art of stepping aside so that what has always been present may be felt. It is the willingness to let God be the only actor. It is the surrender of the belief that life depends upon personal management. This yielding does not happen all at once for most of us. It comes in moments, small moments at first, when we stop, when we pause, when we withdraw attention from the outer clamor and let consciousness settle back into its source. These moments may be brief, but they are powerful, for they are moments in which the illusion of separation loosens its grip. And here is the great secret. The practice does not create the presence. It reveals it. The presence was never absent. The yielding simply removes the interference. As the psalmist said, "Surely God is in this place, and I knew it not." The knowing comes not through effort, but through stillness. So we do not practice to become spiritual. We practice because spirit is already the truth of our being. We do not yield to obtain God. We yield because God is already all. And in that yielding, without drama, without effort, without strain, the soul begins to feel something it has perhaps sought for years rest. Now, having laid aside the burden of striving and having glimpsed the meaning of yielding, we are prepared to approach what has sometimes been called the 3-minute practice. But let us be very clear at the outset. This is not a technique, not a formula, not a method by which God is reached or compelled into action. It is merely a doorway, an opening through which consciousness may pass from effort into awareness. The human mind is very fond of time. It asks, how long must I do this? How many minutes? How many times a day? And so, in mercy, a time reference is sometimes given not because time has spiritual value, but because it helps the human sense relax its urgency. 3 minutes is not a rule. It is not a requirement. It is simply long enough for the mind to stop demanding results and short enough that it does not feel burdened by the idea of practice. In truth, the moment of yielding is timeless. One instant of genuine surrender outweighs years of disciplined effort. 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past. God does not measure our devotion by duration, but by openness. The smallest crack in the door of consciousness is sufficient for the light to enter. This practice, then, is not something you do for 3 minutes. It is something you allow during that pause. You are not entering meditation in order to reach God. You are pausing long enough to recognize that God is already present. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? There is no going toward God. There is only the cessation of running away. When we speak of pausing, we are not speaking of stopping life. Life continues. The body breathes. The heart beats. The world moves. But the frantic mental grasping, the need to fix, improve, control, or direct rests. And in that resting, consciousness naturally turns inward, not by effort, but by inclination. As a river returns to the sea, consciousness returns to its source when not obstructed. Many ask, what am I to think about during these moments? And the answer is simple. Nothing in particular. This is not a thinking exercise. Thinking belongs to the realm of separation. This is a listening. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Notice that the servant does not speak first. The servant listens. And listening does not require words. It requires receptivity. You are not listening for a voice, not listening for guidance, not listening for messages. All such expectations belong to the human mind and will only keep it active. You are listening in the sense that you are open to the fact of presence, open to the awareness of being, open to the reality that God is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. This is why the Master said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation. You cannot watch it arrive. You cannot analyze it. You cannot measure it. You can only notice when the striving ceases that something has always been here. That something is not a sensation, though it may be felt. It is not an emotion, though peace may arise. It is the quiet certainty of being held, governed, sustained. In these moments, thoughts may still appear. Do not battle them. Do not judge them. Do not attempt to stop them. Simply do not follow them. Let them pass as clouds pass through the sky. The sky does not struggle with clouds. It remains the sky. So it is with consciousness. Thoughts have no power of their own. They borrow power only when believed. The practice is not concerned with what appears in consciousness, but with what remains when appearance is no longer grasped. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Confidence does not come from having answers. It comes from resting in the source of answers. At first, these pauses may seem uneventful. The mind may say, nothing happened. And that is precisely the point. The human sense is accustomed to drama, to sensation, to proof. But God does not announce himself. God reveals himself in peace. The absence of disturbance is not emptiness. It is fullness unrecognized by the senses. Gradually, and I emphasize gradually, for this is not forced, there comes a familiarity with this inward turning. The soul begins to recognize the feeling of home, not excitement, not ecstasy, but home. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations, not a place we visit, but a place we abide. And something else begins to happen, almost unnoticed. The pause extends beyond the pause. The awareness does not end when the 3 minutes end. You return to your activity, but something remains open. The inner ear stays receptive. The sense of presence accompanies you not as a thought, but as a quiet undercurrent. This is why the practice must never be turned into a ritual. The moment you try to do it right, you have already stepped back into effort. The pause is not sacred because of what you do in it. It is sacred because of what you stop doing. You stop directing life. You stop managing God. You stop trying to live spiritually. And in that stopping, Spirit lives you. The 3 minutes are not the goal. They are the invitation. They are the doorway through which consciousness begins to remember itself. And once remembrance begins, practice ceases to feel like practice. It becomes a way of being simple, quiet, unforced. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Not tomorrow, not after improvement, now, in stillness. Now we come to what might be called the beginning of the practice, though in truth it is not a beginning at all, but a returning to what has always been present, waiting patiently beneath the noise of thought and the activity of the senses. And this returning does not require preparation, posture, discipline, or effort. It requires only a willingness to stop reaching outward and to let attention rest. When you enter this pause, do not think of it as entering something new. Think of it as withdrawing from something unnecessary. Withdraw from the need to manage the moment. Withdraw from the need to understand what is happening. Withdraw even from the desire to experience God. God does not respond to desire. God reveals himself in surrender. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit does not mean lacking devotion. It means empty of self-effort. You do not need to adjust the breath. The breath already knows how to breathe. You do not need to relax the body. The body relaxes naturally when it is no longer being supervised by anxious thought. You do not need to still the mind. The mind quiets itself when it is no longer being used as a tool to achieve peace. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet they are clothed. So too is consciousness sustained without effort. The first movement inward is so subtle that it is often overlooked. It is not a movement in space, but a movement of interest. Interest withdraws from appearances and rests without direction within. You are not looking for something inside. You are simply no longer looking outside. And in that cessation of outward search, awareness naturally settles back into itself. At this point, many expect something dramatic, a shift, a feeling, a revelation. But God does not announce his presence. He reveals it quietly as peace. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth. The world gives through stimulation, sensation, and excitement. God gives through stillness. And because the human sense has been trained to recognize only what is loud or emotional, it often misses the significance of peace. As you rest in this pause, thoughts may arise. Let them. They are not intruders. They are habits completing themselves. Do not engage them. Do not follow them. Do not judge them. Simply let them pass as you would let a sound pass without turning your head. Resist not evil, the Master said, and thought, when resisted, becomes more active. When ignored, it dissolves. There may also arise a sense of waiting, a feeling that something should happen. Let that go as well. Waiting implies future. This practice is not about what will come. It is about what is already here. Before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, not I will be, but I am. The presence is not approaching you. It is revealed when expectation ceases. At times, you may notice a sense of spaciousness, a quiet openness, a subtle awareness that feels larger than thought. Do not grasp it. Grasping turns awareness into an object and returns you to effort. Simply remain available. The Father does not need to be held. He sustains you. Underneath are the everlasting arms. The first true sign that you have entered this practice is not a feeling, but a release from the sense that something must be done, a release from the urgency to improve yourself, a release from the belief that you are responsible for bringing God into your experience. When this release comes, even faintly, you are touching the hem of the garment. And here we must understand something vital. You are not entering silence. Silence is receiving you. Silence is not something you create. It is the natural state of being when the interference of thought is set aside. That is why it feels familiar. That is why it feels like home. In Him, we live and move and have our being. You are not visiting God. You are resting in your own source. Do not be discouraged if this feels simple. The human mind distrusts simplicity. It believes that what is valuable must be complex, but the truth is simple because it is fundamental. Life does not require explanation in order to function. It requires recognition in order to be enjoyed. As you come out of this pause, do not close it. Do not shut the door behind you. Carry the openness with you. Let the inner ear remain receptive. Let awareness remain lightly anchored within, even as the hands move and the mind attends to necessary tasks. You will discover that you can listen inwardly while living outwardly. This is the beginning of true meditation, not as an activity, but as a state of being. And so the first turning within is not an event. It is a shift in orientation from effort to allowance, from management to trust, from seeking to resting. And once this turning has been tasted, even briefly, the soul knows the way back. It will return again and again, not because it is told to, but because it has remembered its dwelling place. Now, as the turning within becomes more natural, there dawns upon consciousness a realization that may at first seem surprising, and yet, once glimpsed, feels utterly self-evident. Silence is not something we enter. Silence is what remains when we stop interfering. Silence is not created by stilling thought. Silence is the ground in which thought appears. For years, perhaps for a lifetime, we have believed that silence must be achieved, that it lies at the end of discipline, practice, or mastery. We have imagined that if only the mind would stop thinking, then peace would come. But this reverses the divine order. Peace does not come after silence. Silence is revealed when peace is allowed. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Notice, he maketh me to lie down. The rest is not self-generated, it is bestowed. When you begin to notice silence, you are not noticing an absence. You are noticing a presence that does not shout. Silence is not empty, it is full. It is the fullness of being, unfragmented by thought. It is the womb of creation, the stillness out of which all activity proceeds. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And before the word was spoken, there was the silence in which the word could be heard. Thought comes and goes. Sensations arise and fade. Emotions move like tides. But silence remains. It has always remained. It was present before your first thought this morning, and it will be present after your last thought tonight. You do not enter it, you discover it, and discovery is effortless, for it is recognition, not attainment. Many are surprised to find that thoughts may still arise even while silence is felt. This confuses the human mind, which believes silence means the total absence of thought. But spiritual silence is not the eradication of thought, it is the withdrawal of identity from thought. Thought becomes something that passes through awareness, not something that defines awareness. I am not my thoughts, one might say, but even that is too much. It is enough to know that you are the awareness in which thoughts appear. When this is recognized, even faintly, the struggle ends. You no longer fight thought, and thought no longer fights you. There is a gentle detachment, a holy indifference, not born of coldness, but of understanding. They that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. To mind the Spirit is not to think about Spirit, but to rest as Spirit. At this stage, silence may reveal itself as a subtle sense of depth, as though awareness has dropped beneath the surface of mental activity into something vast and steady. There may be no words for it, and none are needed. God is not known through description. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared. Yet they are known, not by the senses, not by the intellect, but by the heart that has ceased demanding proof. Do not try to hold this silence. Holding is effort. Silence does not need to be preserved. It preserves you. The moment you attempt to maintain it, you step back into personal control. Instead, let silence come and go as it will. Even when it seems to disappear, it has not gone anywhere. Only attention has shifted, and attention can return gently, without force, again and again. This is where faith deepens, not faith in a doctrine, not faith in a promise, but faith in the invisible, faith that does not seek confirmation, faith that rests. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Silence is that evidence, not dramatic, not spectacular, but unmistakably real. Gradually, you may notice that silence is not confined to moments of pause. It begins to accompany you into activity. You may be speaking, working, or walking, and yet inwardly there is a quiet background, a steady presence. This is not something you maintain. It is something that maintains you. It is the fulfillment of the promise. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. At this point, life begins to feel less personal, not less intimate, but less burdened by the sense of I must do this, or I must figure this out. There is a growing trust that something greater than human planning is at work, and indeed it is. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Holding your peace does not mean remaining silent outwardly. It means refraining from inward resistance. The discovery that silence is already here changes the entire spiritual orientation. You stop chasing experiences. You stop measuring progress. You stop evaluating yourself. You rest more often, more naturally, more spontaneously, and in that resting, the fruits of the Spirit appear, not because you have sought them, but because they are the natural outflow of realized presence, peace, assurance, harmony, guidance. Silence does not speak in words, yet it communicates more clearly than speech. It does not explain, yet it resolves. It does not argue, yet it convinces. And once you have tasted this silence, even briefly, you will never again be satisfied with noise, even spiritual noise in its place. You will recognize the difference between talking about God and resting in God. And so, without effort, without intention, without demand, you find yourself returning again and again to this quiet awareness. Not because you must, but because you may. Not because you are instructed, but because you are drawn. The soul has remembered its native air. Now, as silence is discovered not as an experience to be captured, but as a presence to be recognized, there arises a natural question in the human mind: how often should I return to this? And here again we must be careful, for the moment we turn stillness into a schedule or a discipline, we risk converting grace into labor. The repetition we speak of is not mechanical repetition. It is the repetition of remembrance. In the infinite way, nothing is gained through routine. Routine belongs to the human sense of control. What we are speaking of is not a habit imposed upon consciousness, but a gentle inclination of consciousness toward its source. Once the soul has tasted even a moment of true rest, it will return of its own accord, just as the body returns naturally to sleep when it is tired. No command is necessary. This is why repetition here does not mean doing the same thing again. It means allowing the same recognition to arise again. Each pause is new. Each moment of yielding is fresh. You are not recreating yesterday's silence. You are discovering today's presence. Behold, I make all things new. Even the stillness is new, because awareness is new in every moment. At first, these pauses may be deliberate. You may remember to stop, to withdraw attention inward, to listen. But very soon, if you do not interfere, this remembering becomes spontaneous. In the midst of activity, something within you relaxes. Without conscious decision, the inner ear opens. Without effort, the sense of presence makes itself felt. This is not practice as discipline. This is practice as relationship. We must understand that God does not respond to effort, but to availability. The practice is not repeated in order to persuade God to act. God is always acting. The practice is repeated only because the human sense forgets, and forgetting is not sin, it is habit. Each pause is simply a returning from forgetfulness to remembrance. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Remember, not learn, not achieve, not build, but remember. This is why the practice can be carried into every circumstance. You do not need silence around you. You need silence within you. You do not need conditions to change. You need attention to soften. You may be walking, working, speaking, or even dealing with what appears to be a problem, and yet inwardly there can be a quiet listening. The outer activity does not stop, but the inner struggle does. At times, you may notice the temptation to use the practice to return to silence in order to fix something, heal something, or change something. When that happens, gently withdraw again. Using silence is still effort. Silence is not a tool. It is a state of being. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. The kingdom is not sought for the sake of the things. The things appear as a byproduct of resting in the kingdom. There will also be moments when you forget entirely. You may go through hours, even days, without consciously pausing. Do not condemn yourself. Condemnation only strengthens the sense of separation. The moment you remember, return. That is enough. One return in love outweighs many hours of effort in fear. His mercies are new every morning. There is no penalty for forgetting. There is only the joy of remembering. As this returning becomes more natural, you may notice something subtle but profound. The pauses begin to lengthen without intention. What once felt like 3 minutes now feels like an atmosphere in which you live. The silence accompanies you, not as something you enter and leave, but as a quiet constancy. You are no longer practicing stillness. Stillness is practicing you. At this stage, the practice ceases to feel personal. It no longer feels like your meditation or your spiritual work. It feels as though something deeper is drawing you inward again and again. And indeed it is. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him. You are not returning to God. God is drawing you to himself. This repetition without repetition guards against spiritual pride. There is no sense of progress, no sense of attainment, no sense of I have arrived. There is only humility, a gentle awareness that without this returning, the human sense quickly reasserts itself. And so you return, not as a student performing a lesson, but as a child returning home. And in this returning, something else is quietly established: trust. Trust not in your ability to practice, but trust in the presence that receives you trust that you do not fall out of grace because you forget. Trust that God is not withholding himself until you do it right. Trust that the Father within is always doing the work, even when you are unaware. This is why repetition in the infinite way never becomes dry. It never becomes mechanical. It never becomes a burden. It is not repetition of form. It is repetition of surrender. And surrender, when it is real, always brings rest. Now we come to a point where the human mind often becomes uneasy, for we are about to touch a principle that runs directly counter to centuries of religious and metaphysical training. We have been taught earnestly, sincerely, that spiritual practice exists in order to solve problems. We pray for healing, for supply, for harmony, for protection. We meditate in order to change conditions. And yet, the deeper truth reveals something startling. The practice does not address problems at all. Problems dissolve in its presence. This is difficult for the human mind to accept because it believes problems are real entities that must be dealt with, confronted, corrected, or overcome. But the infinite way reveals that what we call problems are not entities. They are appearances arising from a false premise, the belief in separation from God. When that premise is not entertained, the appearance loses its foundation. When the light is come into the world, the darkness comprehendeth it not. Darkness is not fought. It vanishes in the presence of light. The moment you sit down to meditate about a problem, you have already given it reality. You have accepted the premise that something exists outside of God that must be fixed. But if God is infinite, omnipresent, and omnipotent, then where could a problem exist? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? The question itself implies the answer: there is no power apart from God. In the practice of stillness, you are not ignoring problems. You are withdrawing belief from them. You are refusing to grant them mental residence. You are not saying this problem does not exist in a metaphysical denial. You are saying nothing at all, and that is far more powerful. Silence is not denial. It is recognition that God alone is present. When consciousness rests in this recognition, something extraordinary happens. The mind stops rehearsing the problem. The emotional charge dissolves. Fear loosens its grip. And without struggle, without direction, without intent, the condition begins to change, or, more accurately, the belief sustaining it collapses. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Not work you free, make you free. Freedom is the natural result of truth realized. This is why the Master did not analyze disease, lack, or sin. He did not treat conditions. He revealed God. And in the presence of that revelation, conditions changed. When the man born blind was healed, Jesus did not inquire into causes. He said simply, "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest." The problem was never the blindness. The problem was the belief that life existed outside of God. As you continue in this practice, returning again and again to stillness without agenda, you may notice that issues which once consumed your attention begin to fade from importance. This does not mean you become indifferent or irresponsible. It means you are no longer hypnotized by appearances. You respond when response is required, but you do not live in reaction. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Peace is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of fear. There will be moments when the human sense insists, but this is serious. This must be dealt with. When that happens, return again to silence, not to escape, but to remember. Remember that God is the only cause. Remember that there is only one power. Remember that the presence you are resting in governs all. And then stop. Stop explaining. Stop affirming. Stop working. Let the divine activity do what it has always done. Maintain harmony. It is important to understand that this does not mean you will never face challenges. Appearances will continue to arise as long as the world of sense is believed. But the difference is this: challenges no longer define your state of consciousness. They no longer determine your peace. They no longer dictate your inner climate. You face them from rest, not from fear, from awareness, not from struggle. This is what it means to live by grace. Grace is not a reward for spiritual effort. It is the natural action of God when human effort ceases. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. A gift cannot be earned. It can only be received. And it is received in stillness. As this understanding deepens, you may find that you no longer feel the need to talk about your problems. You no longer feel compelled to analyze them, explain them, or defend your right to be troubled by them. There is a quiet confidence that something greater is at work, and indeed it is. The Lord shall perfect that which concerneth me. Perfect, not patch, not repair, not manage. And so the practice reveals its true purpose. It is not a tool for fixing life. It is a doorway into the awareness that life does not need fixing. It is governed, sustained, and unfolded by divine law. When this is realized, even partially, the burden lifts. And where the burden lifts, healing follows, naturally, quietly, inevitably. At first, this practice of stillness appears to us as something we do. We sit quietly. We withdraw from thought. We pause in receptivity. And this is right. This is where all spiritual unfoldment begins. But if the practice remains only something we do at appointed times, it will never fulfill its purpose. Its true intent is not to give us moments of peace, but to usher us into a state of consciousness in which peace becomes the atmosphere of our lives. In the beginning, you may experience stillness only briefly, perhaps for a few seconds, perhaps for a minute or two. That is enough. Do not despise the day of small beginnings. The mustard seed does not look like a tree, yet within it is the entire tree. Every sincere moment of quiet receptivity plants a seed in consciousness, and consciousness never forgets what it has touched. Gradually, something subtle begins to take place. You will notice that the silence you once experienced only in meditation begins to follow you into daily activity. It may come as a sudden pause in the middle of conversation, a stillness beneath motion, a calm awareness while the body is engaged in work. This is the beginning of living the practice rather than visiting it. In Him we live and move and have our being. This is no longer poetry. It is experience. The mind, which once raced ahead into the future or lingered anxiously in the past, begins to lose its compulsive momentum, not because you have disciplined it, but because it has discovered something greater than itself. The mind yields naturally when it senses the presence of divine intelligence. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not the goal. Knowing is. Stillness is simply the door through which knowing enters. As this awareness deepens, you will find that you no longer need to withdraw from the world in order to find God. God is discovered in the midst of the world. You may be driving a car, preparing a meal, walking down a street, and suddenly there is an unmistakable sense of presence. No words accompany it. No thoughts explain it. Yet it is unmistakable. It is nearer than breathing, closer than hands and feet. At this stage, meditation ceases to be an exercise and becomes a return. You are not striving to reach God. You are recognizing where you already are. The sense of separation that once dominated religious thought dissolves quietly. You no longer think of God as something to be attained, persuaded, or pleased. God is revealed as life itself, your life expressing, sustaining, and unfolding itself as you. This is why the practice must never be forced. You cannot will yourself into this state. You cannot hurry it. You cannot produce it through effort. Every attempt to do so merely strengthens the sense of a separate self trying to achieve something spiritual. And that self must eventually be surrendered. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. A child does not strain to be. A child simply is. There comes a moment different for each of us when the inner resistance gives way. You stop trying to live spiritually and find that you are living spiritually. You stop trying to trust God and discover that trust has replaced effort. You stop trying to let go and realize that what you thought you were holding never belonged to you in the first place. From this place, life takes on a different quality. Decisions are made without anxiety. Actions arise without strain. Even challenges, when they appear, do not disturb the inner equilibrium. They are met from a deeper center. You are no longer standing on the surface of life, reacting to waves. You are anchored beneath them. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. The waters may rise, but they do not overwhelm. It is important to understand that this does not remove you from human experience. You still live in the world. You still fulfill responsibilities. You still encounter relationships, duties, and change. But you are no longer defined by them. Your identity has shifted from the outer to the inner. You know now, not intellectually, but experientially, that your life is hid with Christ in God. And so the practice becomes continuous, not as an effort, but as an awareness. There is an abiding sense of being accompanied, guided, upheld. You do not have to remind yourself of God's presence. It reminds you. You do not have to seek direction. It unfolds. You do not have to guard your peace. Peace guards you. This is the transition from moments of stillness to a life established in stillness. It is not dramatic. It is not announced. It does not come with signs and wonders. It comes quietly, as truth always does. And once it has come, you will recognize that nothing real has been added to you. Only what was unreal has fallen away. There comes a sacred moment in the unfolding of spiritual consciousness when one discovers that the greatest burden of human existence is not suffering, nor lack, nor disease, but self-management. The ceaseless effort to direct life, to protect oneself, to plan outcomes, to secure tomorrow. This is the weight that bends humanity under its own striving. And it is precisely this burden that grace removes. Grace is not something added to human effort. It is the ending of human effort. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. As long as we believe that life is something we must personally manage, grace remains theoretical. It becomes real only when we are genuinely willing to let go of authorship and allow God to live the life. This is not resignation. It is not passivity. It is not indifference. It is recognition. Recognition that the same presence which formed the stars and set the laws of the universe in motion is fully capable of governing your life without interference. The difficulty is not that God is unwilling to do so. The difficulty is that we are unwilling to step aside. The human sense argues, if I do not think, plan, struggle, or worry, nothing will be done. Yet the opposite is true. It is precisely because we are always thinking, planning, struggling, and worrying that so much effort produces so little fruit. Grace begins to operate when we discover that divine intelligence does not need assistance. The Father within, he doeth the works. In the early stages of this realization, grace may appear intermittently. There are moments when everything seems to fall into place effortlessly, when solutions arise without strain, when needs are met without anxiety, when relationships harmonize without effort. And then, just as quickly, the human mind rushes back in and says, I must hold on to this. I must make sure it continues. In that moment, grace recedes, not because it has withdrawn, but because attention has shifted back to self-effort. Grace does not respond to effort. It responds to yielding. Yielding is not something you do. It is something you stop doing. You stop insisting on personal control. You stop rehearsing fear. You stop defending your limitations. And in that stopping, something takes over. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Notice the order. Stand still first. Seeing follows. As this yielding becomes more natural, you may notice a profound change in your inner dialogue. The constant internal commentary begins to quiet. You are no longer explaining your life to yourself. You are no longer justifying your choices. You are no longer arguing with circumstances. There is a sense that life is being lived through you rather than by you. This is what Paul meant when he said, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. This is not metaphor. It is not theology. It is a literal statement of experience. There is a presence functioning as intelligence, action, timing, and harmony. You are still present, but you are no longer the source. One of the clearest signs that grace is at work is the disappearance of anxiety about outcomes. You still act, but you are not attached to results. You still plan, but you are not burdened by the plan. You still move forward, but without the pressure to make things happen. Take, therefore, no thought for the morrow. This is not irresponsibility. It is trust in divine order. Even supply begins to take on a different meaning. You no longer see it as something you must earn, attract, or deserve. You recognize it as the natural outflow of divine substance expressing itself. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Want disappears not because you have accumulated enough, but because you are resting in the source. Grace also reveals itself in protection, but not as something dramatic or miraculous. It shows up as right timing, as intuition that guides you away from danger, as circumstances rearranging themselves without your awareness. You may only realize afterward that something was avoided or resolved without effort. Grace moves silently. It does not announce itself. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of grace is that it restores simplicity. Life becomes less complicated not because there are fewer events, but because there is less resistance. You no longer feel that every decision carries the weight of survival. You no longer interpret challenges as personal failures. You begin to see life as an unfolding rather than a battle. This does not mean you will never stumble back into self-effort. You will. We all do. But now you recognize the difference. You can feel when you are striving and when you are resting. And because you know the taste of grace, you are less willing to live without it. You return more quickly to stillness. You release control more readily. You trust more deeply. Grace is not a state you achieve and keep forever by effort. It is a relationship of surrender renewed again and again. Each time you let go, grace is there. Each time you stop, it moves. Each time you yield, it governs. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And so life gradually becomes what it was always meant to be, an expression of divine harmony, lived effortlessly, guided inwardly, sustained continuously. You are no longer trying to live a spiritual life. You are discovering that life itself is spiritual and always has been. At last we arrive at the great revelation that dissolves all seeking, all striving, and all distance between God and man. The kingdom of God is not coming, it is present. It is not elsewhere, it is within. This is not a poetic phrase. It is the central fact of spiritual life. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation. Behold, the kingdom of God is within you. For generations, humanity has looked outward for God toward temples, teachers, books, heavens, and holy places. And while these may point the way, they cannot contain the presence. God has never dwelt in buildings made with hands. God has never resided in words or forms. God has always been the very substance of consciousness itself. The tragedy is not that God is absent, but that we have been looking in the wrong direction. When stillness deepens sufficiently, something unmistakable dawns. You are not approaching God. You are awakening to God. You are not entering the kingdom. You are remembering where you have always been. The sense of separation dissolves, not because it is overcome, but because it is seen to have never existed. Before Abraham was, I am. Before effort, before belief, before fear, I am. This realization changes everything, yet outwardly may appear to change very little. The world remains the world. The body remains the body. But the center of identity has shifted. You no longer identify yourself as a human being seeking God. You recognize yourself as the place where God is consciously known. And from that moment, spiritual life ceases to be a pursuit and becomes a recognition renewed daily. The inner kingdom is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with emotion or spectacle. It arrives quietly, like dawn. One moment you realize, I am not alone. I never have been. There is an intelligence thinking where you once struggled to think. There is a peace resting where you once labored to be at peace. There is a love functioning where you once tried to love. This is why silence is the gateway. Thought cannot enter the kingdom. It can only circle around it. Words cannot describe it. They can only point. Stillness alone allows consciousness to sink beneath the surface of appearances and touch reality. Be still and know that I am God. Not believe, not affirm, know. As this knowing becomes familiar, the inner kingdom ceases to be an experience and becomes a foundation. You no longer ask, is God with me? You know it. You no longer seek reassurance. You rest. And from that rest, life flows in ways that surprise the human sense, not because miracles are occurring, but because resistance has ended. It is important to understand that spiritual realization does not leave life barren or abstract. The inner kingdom bears fruit, and always outwardly, by their fruits ye shall know them. Truth realized does not remain hidden. It expresses itself as harmony, health, guidance, supply, and right activity, not as rewards, but as natural outcomes. When consciousness is aligned with divine reality, The invisible becomes visible without effort. Needs are met without anxiety. Opportunities appear without pursuit. Relationships adjust without manipulation. Even the body responds not because it has been healed, but because the false belief governing it has been released. God does not heal the body. God is the life of the body revealed. The mistake so often made is to look for these fruits as proof. The moment you do, you have shifted back into the human sense of demonstration. Fruits appear when they are not being watched for. They unfold when attention is resting in God, not when it is checking results. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you, added, not earned. This is why the true spiritual life is simple. It is not cluttered with techniques, methods, or formulas. It consists of one thing only: abiding in awareness, returning again and again to stillness, letting go again and again of personal sense, allowing the divine presence to reveal itself as the activity of daily life. Now we come to the final and perhaps most vital understanding. Realization must be lived. It cannot be stored. It cannot be relied upon from yesterday. It cannot be maintained through memory. The manna falls daily. The inner practice must be renewed, not through effort, but through availability. Even after profound realization, the human sense can creep back in quietly. Responsibilities increase, activity multiplies, the fruits themselves can distract us from the source. And so the call remains: return to stillness, not to get something, but to remain aligned. Abide in me, and I in you. Abiding is not effort, it is consent. You will find that as you continue in this way, life becomes less about doing and more about allowing, less about becoming and more about being, less about effort and more about grace. You do not withdraw from the world, you overcome it, not by power, but by understanding. And one day, perhaps suddenly, perhaps gently, you will realize that stillness is no longer something you enter. It is where you live. Thought arises within it. Activity moves within it. Challenges pass through it without disturbing it. You are established, anchored at home. This is the fulfillment of the spiritual life. Not escape, not perfection, not withdrawal, but conscious union. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So let us not seek more teachings, more methods, or more effort. Let us seek only to be still. Let us consent to the presence that has always been nearer than breathing. Let us trust the grace that governs without strain. And let us live not by might nor by power, but by spirit. Do not be satisfied with a second-hand God. Do not live on borrowed light. Enter the silence. Abide there, and let the life that is God live itself as you.